Thanks, everyone. As the magical voice above said, my name is Alex, and for the past 12 years, I've been obsessively studying success. So I've spent thousands of hours researching, going through hundreds of biographies, and most importantly, sitting down one-on-one and asking questions to the people I was dying to get answers from. So for business, I interviewed Bill Gates. For music, Lady Gaga, science, Jane Goodall, poetry, Maya Angelou, Quincy Jones, Larry King, Steve Wozniak, Jessica Alba, Pitbull. It's been this really exciting journey filled with surprising lessons at every turn. And the reason I'm so excited to be here with all of you today as part of this closing is specifically to share some of my favorite stories about the mindset of exponential growth, and particularly to focus on how no matter what's happening externally in the marketplace or in the external environment, how can we make sure we're cultivating that mindset of growth within us, no matter what stage in your career you're in, or no matter what part of the industry you live in. So what we're going to do is I'm going to spend the first about 30 minutes sharing some of my favorite stories from this 12-year journey. And then we're going to go into Q&A, and because we have a pretty intimate group today, it'll actually be pretty fun to go into this audience and sort of ask some questions about what's on your minds. So, before we dive into some of the big stories, I'll give you a bit of context to how this whole journey got started. And in order to do that, I have to take you back 12 years. So at the time, I was a freshman in college, and I was spending every day lying on my dorm room bed, staring up at the ceiling. And I was going through the what do I want to do with my life crisis. And actually, so I get a sense for this room. Again, it's a pretty intimate room, so I can see all of your faces, which is nice. By a show of hands, so I can get a sense for all of you, who has at some point of their life gone through the what do I want to do with my life crisis, or is maybe going through it now? And give me full arms so I can get a sense for us. Okay, we're at like 98% of us and about 2% liars right here in the middle, so we're good. So to understand why I was going through it, you have to understand that I'm the son of Persian Jewish immigrants, which pretty much means I came out of the womb, my mom cradled me in her arms, and then she stamped doctor on my behind and sent me on my way. And you might think I'm kidding, but I literally wore scrubs to school for Halloween and thought I was cool. That was my childhood growing up. And in high school, I checked all the boxes. I took all the biology classes. I went to pre-med summer camp. I studied hard for the SAT. So by the time I got to college, I was the pre-med of pre-meds. But very quickly, I found myself lying on this dorm room bed, looking at this towering stack of biology books, feeling like it was sucking the life out of me. And at first I assumed, maybe I'm just being lazy. But eventually began to wonder, maybe I'm not on my path. Maybe I'm on a path somebody's placed me on and I'm just rolling down. So now not only do I not know what I want to do with my life, I had no idea how the people who I looked up to, how they did it. How did Bill Gates sell his first piece of software out of his dorm room when nobody knew his name? How did Spielberg become the youngest director in Hollywood history without a single hit under his belt? This is what they don't teach you in school. So I just assumed there had to be a book with the answers. So I'm going to the library and ripping through business books and biography and self-help books, assuming there had to be a book, not on a particular age in life, but really a stage. When you have a big goal and you have a big dream and no one's taking your calls, no one's taking your meetings, how do you find a way to break through? And eventually, I was left empty-handed. So that's when my naive 18-year-old thinking kicked in. I thought, well, if no one's written the book I'm dreaming of reading, why not do it myself? And I thought it'd be super simple. I thought I'd just call Bill Gates, interview him, interview everybody else, and I'll be done in a few months. That I thought would be the easy part. The hard part, I figured, was getting the money to fund this journey. I was buried in student loan debt. I was all out of bar mitzvah cash. So I figured there had to be another way. So 2 nights before final exams, I'm in the library doing what everyone does in the library right before finals. I'm on Facebook. And I'm on Facebook and I see somebody offering free tickets to The Price is Right. And again, I know there's people from all over the world in the room, so by show of hands, who has grown up or has seen The Price is Right? Who knows the game show The Price is Right? Okay, great, almost the entire room, perfect. So, you all know The Price is Right, longest running game show in American history. And I was actually going to school in Los Angeles, not too far from where the show filmed. And I saw somebody offering free tickets to the show that was filming the next day. And my first thought was, what if I go on the show and win some money to fund this book? Not my brightest moment. Plus, I had a problem. I'd never seen a full episode of the show before. So, I told myself it was, a stupid idea and to not think about it. But I don't know if any of you have ever had one of those moments where no matter how ridiculous an idea, for some reason it keeps clawing itself back into your mind. So almost to prove to myself it was a bad idea, I remember I was sitting at this round wooden table in the corner of the library, and I took out my spiral notebook, and I wrote best and worst case scenarios to prove to myself it was a bad idea. And I remember writing, worst case scenarios: fail finals, get kicked out of pre-med, lose financial aid, mom stops talking to me, no, mom kills me. There was about 20 cons. And the only pro was maybe win enough money to fund this dream. And it's almost as if somebody had tied a rope around my gut and was slowly pulling in a direction. So that night, I decided to do the logical thing and pull an all-nighter to study. But I didn't study for finals. I started to hack the Price is Right. And I went on the show the next day and did this ridiculous strategy and ended up winning the whole showcase showdown, winning a sailboat, selling that sailboat, and that's how I funded the book. And that's how the journey set off. And you guys have to understand, too, I was 18 years old, and I sold that sailboat for $17,000, and I thought I was a billionaire. I'm taking all my friends out to lunch at Chipotle, free guacamole for everybody. I'm feeling really good. And when I had started this journey, it took 2 years to track down Bill Gates. It took 3 years to track down Lady Gaga. And when I had started this journey, there was no part of me looking for that one key to success. We've all seen those business books or those TED Talks, and normally I just roll my eyes. But what ended up happening over 7 years of interviews is I started realizing every single one of these people, it didn't matter if it was Maya Angelou from Stamps, Arkansas, Jane Goodall from London, every single one of them treated life and business and success the exact same way. And the analogy that came to me is that it's sort of like getting into a nightclub. There's always 3 ways in. So there's the first door, the main entrance, where the line curves around the block, where 99% of people wait around hoping to get in. And we all know that line where people are standing out in the cold, hoping the bouncer lets them in. That's the first door. And then there's a second door, the VIP entrance, where the billionaires and celebrities go through. And for some reason, school and society have this way of making us feel like those are the only 2 ways in. You either wait your turn or you're born into it. But what I've learned, and what I'm sure many of you have seen in your own careers, is that there's always, always the third door. And it's the door where you jump out of line, run down the alley, bang on the door 100 times, crack open the window, go through the kitchen. There's always a way in. And it doesn't matter if that's how Bill Gates sold his first piece of software or how Spielberg became the youngest director in Hollywood history. They all took the third door. Now, when I was thinking a lot about this event and thinking a lot, particularly about what unites everyone in this room, particularly if you were in hospitality or travel in the past 2 years, your job required a tremendous amount of persistence. And when you study success for 12 years, persistence comes up in every story. But there was one moment in particular that completely changed my understanding of how persistence actually works in the business world, how it actually unfolds in real life. And this story takes place a couple years into the journey. Now, a bit of context, with the third door, things were in a random series of events. Everything that happened had something that came right before it. Right before this situation, what you need to know is there was a disastrous situation with Warren Buffett. And it's a story for another time. Maybe we can go into it in the Q&A, but what you need to know is I ended up having, essentially 3 months of writing letters back and forth with Warren Buffett, asking him for an interview, and his answer was always no. And then another 3 months, so now 6 months of writing more letters, and the answer continued to be no. And you all know when you have 3 months of rejection, you feel like there's a cloud over your head. By 6 months of straight rejections, you want to cough up blood. And I ended up going to Omaha, Nebraska for his annual shareholders meeting, and in front of 30,000 people, hacking his shareholders meeting and asking that question to him in front of 30,000 people. And it was a giant disaster. Buffett figured out what was going on, it backfired in my face, and it was one of those moments where you just want to crawl into bed and pull the covers over your head and just disappear from the world. And it was by far the lowest moment of the entire journey. And that's where this story begins. Now, if there is a theme of this journey, it's that when I was at my lowest points, it would always be my best friends who would pull me back up. And I have this one friend by the name of Corwin. And after I spent a couple weeks sort of sulking in bed, my friend Corin sort of called me up and said, dude, let's go grab some lunch. So we go to this local grocery store in Los Angeles, and we go essentially get some sandwiches, and we're sitting on the sidewalk watching the cars pass by. And my friend Corin, asked me, dude, don't you have any other interviews lined up? And I said, dude, I got nothing. And he said, come on, let's say you had an interview lined up, who would you want to talk to? And I said, look, man, look at what happened with Buffett. Even if I had an interview lined up, I'd probably mess that up too. And he said, listen, man, you can't be so hard on yourself. Interviewing isn't a science, it's an art. And as we were talking about this, the single most miraculous moment of the entire journey happened. A car pulled up, parked right in front of me. The door swung open, and out walks Larry King. Now, if you are anything like me, when things line up so perfectly like that is actually when I get the most nervous. And I have a name for that feeling. I call it the flinch. It's that feeling when, your mouth is wired shut, your throat tightens up, your feet turn to stone. And I remember sitting there on that sidewalk, watching Larry King walk right past me, right through the grocery store sliding doors. And I didn't say a thing. And my friend Corin, jabs his elbow into me and says, dude, why didn't you say anything? And this is the thing about fear. Fear is very good at making logical excuses. Fear is very good at making logical excuses. So, of course, my fear came up with a good excuse. I said, he's probably, going to the grocery store to get something for his family. I don't want to bother him. I don't want to be that kind of guy. And Corin said, dude, you are that guy. So, of course, my fear came up with more excuses. I said, he's probably, deep into the grocery store now. There's no way I'll be able to find him. And Corin said, dude, he is 80 years old. How far can he go? So, very reluctantly, I stand up off the sidewalk, and I go into this grocery store looking for Larry King. And, I walk into the bakery section, no Larry. I go over to the produce section, fruits, vegetables, no Larry. And right then, I remembered he had parked in a loading zone, so he must be leaving any second now. So this bolt of adrenaline kicks in. Now I start running down the aisles looking down each one. No Larry, no Larry, no Larry, no Larry. And I'm cutting through the frozen food section. He's not there, and I figure he's got to be at the checkout counter. So I'm sprinting to the checkout counter, looking down each one, no Larry, no Larry, no Larry, no Larry. And at that point, I wanted to kick myself. Because when he had been right in front of me, I hadn't said a thing. So I'm walking out of this grocery store, essentially staring down at my feet, and slowly, I'm in the parking lot, and I raise my eyes, and I see right about 20 feet in front of me is Larry King's suspenders and all. And I don't know what got into me, but it's almost as if all this pent-up frustration and rejections began combusting in the pit of my stomach. And I started yelling uncontrollably at the top of my lungs, Mr. King! And the echo in the parking lot was so loud, I will always remember Larry King jumping up in the air like, every wrinkle on his face sprung back, and I didn't really know what to do. So I was like, oh, Mr. King, my name's Alex. I'm so sorry. I just wanted to say hi. And he goes, okay, hi. And he starts walking the other way. And I'm trying to think of something intelligent to say now to save myself from the situation. So, I'm sort of awkwardly following him out, trying to think of something intelligent to say. And now, we're out on the sidewalk in front of his car. He opens, the trunk, stuffs his groceries in. I go, wait, Mr. King. Can I go to breakfast with you? And he looks at me like I'm a lunatic. But before he can respond, he looks around on the sidewalk and sees there's about a dozen people watching this go down. So for reasons I may never understand, he just shrugs his shoulders and goes, okay. And I'm like, oh my God, great, thank you so much, amazing. And, he tells me where to meet him, and I say, great, I'll see you tomorrow. And he opens the car, he's about to sit inside and shut the door, and I go, wait, Mr. King. What time? And he just looks at me and slams the door shut. And I'm thinking, okay, maybe he didn't hear me. So I'm now shouting through the window, Mr. King, what time? And he looks at me again and starts the engine. I am now flailing my arms in front of his windshield, begging, Mr. King, what time? And he just looks at me and goes, 9 o'clock. And he speeds off. Now, the moral of this story is not to chase any of your clients or customers down through a grocery store, particularly not this year. The moral of the story comes next. So sure enough, the next morning comes around, and I walk into this bagel restaurant in Los Angeles, and boom, right there, corner table, is Larry King and his best friends. So I had some time the night prior to reflect on how I'd acted the day before, and I thought, today maybe I would take a different approach and be a bit more gentle. So, I walk over to the table and I just put a little hand up and I go, hey, good morning, Mr. King. And he goes, sort of mumbles me away, and I think, okay, maybe he just wants a few minutes with his friends, and when he's ready, he'll call me over. So there's a table next to him that's completely open, so I sit at that table and I wait. 10 minutes go by, 30 minutes pass, an hour passes, but finally he stands up and starts walking toward me. And I can feel my cheeks lifting. And then he walks right past me and heads for the exit. And I just sort of put a hand up in the air and I go, Mr. King? And he goes, what is it, kid? What do you want? And at that point, I felt a very sharp and familiar pain in my chest. And we all know that feeling when you know that rejection is coming. And I just looked at him and said, honestly, I just wanted some advice on how to interview people. And all of a sudden, a slow smile spreads across his face, almost as if to say, why didn't you just say so? And he ends up giving me the greatest monologue of interview advice I've heard in my entire life. And at the end, he looks up to the ceiling as if he's debating something in his mind. And then he puts a finger in my face and goes, all right, kid, tomorrow, 9 o'clock, see you here. And the next morning, I show up at 9 o'clock. He waves me over to his table. He asks me why I even wanted to learn how to interview people. I tell him about my book, and he goes, all right, I'm in. And over the course of the next 5 years, I went to breakfast with him over 50 times. Now, it's taken me many, many years to realize that, of course, the interview with Larry changed my life tremendously, but it's taken me many years to realize sometimes it was my journey on the way to get to these people that changed me the most. And, we'll get to the lesson about persistence in a minute. We'll put a pin in it. What I will say, and what I'm sure many of you, particularly if you work in the sales parts of the industry, you'll resonate with this. One of the unexpected side effects of me spending 7 years trying to track down some of the hardest to reach people was 7 years of straight rejections. And one of the unintended side effects of that was 7 years of having to go to therapy. And one of the things I had to learn in therapy to wrap my mind around is there's a big difference between the implicit and explicit messages we learn from society. There's a big difference between the implicit and explicit messages we learn from society, and I'll give you an example. An explicit message you learn in your childhood is your mother telling you to eat your vegetables. That's an explicit message. An implicit message is you wake up in the middle of the night and you see your mom having chocolate ice cream in bed. Now, which message do you think has the strongest hold on a child's behavior? Of course, it's the implicit message. Now, let's take that into the business world. Hypothetically, you're at a different company, and this company says our number one company value is risk-taking and innovation. That's the explicit company culture. Now, let's say someone on the team takes a big swing and misses, and they get fired on the spot. What's the implicit message? And again, which message do you think has the strongest hold on how a team will actually operate? It's always the implicit message. Now, when we bring this back to persistence and the messages we're raised with, when you think about it, most of us are raised with pretty great explicit messages around persistence in our childhoods. I grew up in California. What do they tell you when you're a kid growing up these days? Try again, never give up. If you think you can do it, anything's possible. These are the explicit messages we're raised with. But what's the implicit reality of growing up? Let's say you're trying out for the baseball team, and you don't make it the first year, and you don't make it the second year. Let's say you're really brave, and you try out a third year, and you still don't make it. What do the people who love you the most tell you? Maybe try basketball. What about soccer? You love soccer, don't you? By the way, these aren't your competitors or your enemies. This is your mother. These are your best friends. These are the people trying to keep you safe. They tell you after a few attempts, you're better off packing up and going home. And when you go into your career, it's not like someone in HR sits you down once you start in the travel industry, the hospitality industry. It's not like someone sits you down and says, all right, let's unpack your implicit messages from your childhoods. We carry these things right with us. And it wasn't until this experience with Larry King that my implicit messaging around persistence and perseverance completely shattered, and it was replaced with the truth about how persistence actually works in the business world. And the reality is, you have as many at-bats as you're willing to give yourself. You have as many at-bats as you're willing to give yourself, and that changed my life forever. Now, the next story I want to dive into is the story that completely changed my understanding of the relationship between success and failure. Again, the reason we're here as part of this closing session is really to examine the mindset of exponential growth, no matter where in the industry you are. And the foundation of growth is really about re-examining the relationship between success and failure. So this interview took place toward the end of the journey. And again, just like how right before the Larry King situation, there was that situation with Warren Buffett, right before this situation, what you need to know is there was another disastrous situation, but this time it was with Mark Zuckerberg. And again, the whole story is, for another time. Maybe we can dive into it in the Q&A. And in about 10 minutes, we'll go into Q&A. So definitely start thinking of some questions now. But what you need to know is I ended up getting an email introduction to Zuckerberg. I couldn't have been more excited. But because I dropped the ball logistically, the event security thought I was an imposter when I showed up. The building security wouldn't let me in. And I completely missed the meeting. And it was one of those situations where it feels like you just dropped the ball and fumbled it on the 5-yard line during your version of the Super Bowl. And I just couldn't forgive myself. And I woke up day after day after day beating myself up to the point where my insides felt black and blue. And that's how I felt internally as I walked into this final interview with Quincy Jones. Now, I knew what a lot of people growing up in America know about Quincy Jones. I knew that Quincy Jones has more Grammy Awards than any music producer in history. I knew that he worked with Frank Sinatra and Ray Charles. I knew that he produced the best-selling album of all time, Michael Jackson's Thriller. He produced the best-selling single of all time, We Are the World. He, in the world of television, created The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. In the world of film, produced The Color Purple. He helped discover Oprah Winfrey. He's undeniably one of the most successful people in entertainment history. But the second I walked into his house, I realized I didn't know the half of it. So you all sort of have to picture this. Quincy Jones's house is sort of this perfectly circular room with gold lighting coming from the floors. And right in the middle, there's a couch. So I'm sitting down on the couch for a few minutes, and in walks in Quincy Jones. And again, he's about 80 years old, and he's wearing this long blue velvet robe with gold stitching on the bottom. And he sits down next to me, and he goes, where are you from? And I'm like, oh, hi, Mr. Jones. My name's Alex. I'm from Los Angeles. And he said, no. I said, where are you from? And, I'm wondering if this is like a riddle or a trick question. And then I go, oh, my family's from Iran. And he goes, that's what I thought. And he launches into a 30-minute story about dating a Persian princess, trying to break the Ayatollah out of prison, and he sucks me into the Quincy Jones vortex, and it is the happiest place on earth. The guy has a story about everything. We're talking about the pyramids in Egypt. We're talking about Rio's Carnival. And he has this way of sort of looking into your soul and telling you everything you need to know without you even having to ask. And about halfway through our conversation, he tells me a story that, as I mentioned earlier, completely changes my understanding of the relationship between success and failure. So this story takes place early on in Quincy's own career. And he's explaining to me that when he was starting out in the music industry, the entire music industry was run by the mafia. The whole music industry was run by the mafia. And one day, Quincy had to go in to get a music publishing deal from a music executive. So he goes into this music executive's office. He walks into the room. The executive is sitting behind the desk. Quincy sits down, and the executive slides the contract across the table. And Quincy reads it. And the contract says that Quincy will only get 1% of his own publishing. And Quincy's, about to say something, but he looks up, and sees that behind the executive are all his cronies. And the executive leans forward and says, listen, kid, you can ask for whatever you want, but you're only getting 1%. And, I'm hearing this story, and I'm cringing. But I look over at Quincy, and he's laughing. He's like, oh, man, they took all my stuff. And I'm getting more and more upset. And I look over at Quincy, he's smiling now. He's like, oh, I'm still trying to get that stuff back. And I'm like, that's messed up. And he looks at me pretty surprised why I would have an outburst like that in the middle of the story. And only in hindsight can I see that I was still so beat up from that experience with Mark Zuckerberg that any story of someone young making a mistake, getting taken advantage of, was completely setting me off. And it's almost as if Quincy understood something about me that I didn't. Because he put a hand on my shoulder, and he said, it's all right, man. It's how you learn. And it's almost as if my body was this overinflated tire, and Quincy had just hit this escape valve, and all this excess pressure was rushing out. And he looked at me and he said, listen, most people hate their mistakes. They want to pretend their mistakes never happened. They treat their mistakes as their biggest enemy. They treat their mistakes as the worst part of their life. And that's the biggest mistake you can make. It's only when you treat your mistakes as your best friends, it's only when you cherish them can you learn from them. And only then can you grow. Your mistakes are your greatest gift. Of course, that was amazing advice, but before I knew it, the Quincy Jones vortex kept on going. And now, another hour passes by, and, we've all been there at some point in a conversation where you feel a conversation slowly, coming to an end. And I just looked at him and I said, Mr. Jones, I just have to tell you, this conversation has changed my life. And he goes, that's so beautiful, man. How so? And I said, well, you showed me what it takes to be a person of the world and what it takes to grow. And he's like, that's amazing. In what way? And I said, well, you showed me that the only way you can grow is by traveling and going on adventures. And he goes, no. No. You need to cherish your mistakes. And it's almost as if he wasn't going to let me leave that room until that lesson sunk in. And in that moment, it did. And I remember sitting there and having this epiphany that I'd spent my entire journey assuming that the opposite of success is failure. Going back to implicit and explicit messages, what do they teach us in kindergarten? The opposite of up is down, the opposite of success is failure. But it wasn't until I was sitting there with Quincy Jones that I could finally see that success and failure are not only not opposites, they're different sides of the same coin because they're both a result of the same thing. They're both a result of trying. So the opposite of success isn't failure. The opposite of success is not trying. And I remember sitting there and swearing to myself that from this point forward, I would unattach myself from success and unattach myself from failure, and instead commit myself to trying and growing. And that's the biggest thing I wanted to share with all of you today. Now, for the remainder of our time, what I would really love, and again, because we have a pretty intimate-sized group today, it's going to be pretty fun to actually go into Q&A. What I would love to do is go into Q&A, and my only request for Q&A is a couple things. The first thing is the more honest the question and the more challenging the question, the more fun it's going to be. And the second thing is nothing's off the table. So we can talk about whatever is on your mind. We can talk about questions you have about work, questions you have about home, things you want to know about how I got my interviews, what I learned in my interviews, if my mother's still speaking to me. Everything's fair game. So if you want to throw a hand up, I'll come over or we'll run a mic over and we'll dive into it. Yes, sir. What's your name?
My name is Mike.
Everyone, let's give Mike a huge round of applause. Okay, I know it's the closing and you guys have spent a lot of time together already. Like we love Mike, a huge round of applause. There we go. All right, Mike, what's your question? Nice to meet you.
My goal is to ask you a question you've never been asked.
I'll tell you honestly.
All right. So
First of all, by show of hands, who thinks Mike is going to succeed at this goal? Look, I'm going to say that's about 80% of the group. Mike, you got a home crowd here. I'm going to feel real bad if you ask a question I've been asked before.
All right. Well,
all right, the pressure's on.
My question is, as a fellow Angelino,
okay,
Where did Larry King recommend getting a good bagel? Because they're very hard to find.
He did it! Can I tell you, I didn't think you would win. I was like, bro, you don't know. I've been doing this for a long time.
They all knew I've been doing this a long time.
Mike, the professional Q&A. Yeah, if any of you like to visit Los Angeles or someone who's from Los Angeles, Brooklyn Water Bagel on South Beverly Drive in Beverly Hills.
Perfect.
That's Larry King's breakfast spot. Well, it was, but as you know, he passed. But that's where the bagels are.
Thanks a lot.
Everyone, let's give it up for Mike one more time. All right, who's got our next question? Thanks. I know Mike makes it very intimidating after that. Thanks. What's your name? Lisa. Everyone, let's give Lisa a big round of applause. Hey, Lisa, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you, too. I'm just curious maybe what you think one of the most creative ways you got an interview was. If you'd share with us what that was like.
That succeeded?
Yes.
Because I did some, so Lisa's question, what was one of the more creative ways I went about trying to get an interview? That's a good question, too. I would say, you know, there's a lot of stories that didn't work out. You know, with Steven Spielberg, I ended up taking a boat out in Cannes to the French Riviera and delivering my letter to him on his yacht. Didn't work. With Warren Buffett, you know, went to Omaha, Nebraska, shareholders meeting, didn't work. What I will say is almost every single time that an interview did work out, and even with Larry King, while all the ways I got about to these people were different, you know, Larry King was through a grocery store, through another person I met them in a bathroom at a conference they were speaking. You know, there's all these different ways I went about it. The commonality, though, for every single one, and I know people in this room will understand this better than anyone. You all will get this better than anyone. The moment everything changed was when I finally looked in their eyes. Because when you go from a random name in someone's inbox to actually sitting down with someone or looking in front of them, even if it's in a hallway at a conference, and you all know that's the value of events like this. We sort of go from being names on Zoom or names on a text message or names in an inbox to looking each other's eyes and seeing each other's humanity. And, you know, I don't know the spiritual or biological reasons it works. But when someone looks in your eyes and sees that you're genuine and your heart's in the right place, not only do they want to help, but they also want to be your friends, be your colleagues, work together, and that's the magic of not only, you know, going in person to make the request, but it's also the magic of events like this. So that's a great question. Thanks, Lisa. All right, who's got our next question? Yes, over there. What's your name? Okay, no, it's coming right over to you. What did you say your name was? Ira. Everyone, let's give Ira a huge round of applause.
Thank you.
Hi, Ira.
Cool. Hi. A very fascinating story. Thanks so much for sharing it. My question is, you mentioned that the story, the journey began 12 years ago, and I understand the book was recently published, right? Just last year. A few years ago. Do you feel like the publishing of your book was the end of your journey?
Ooh. Man, you guys are 3 for 3 for brand new questions. I thought I was, you know, maybe I had some ego here thinking I'd heard them all, but you guys are really good. That's great. Did I think the publishing of the book was the end of the journey? I tell you the truth, I thought when it was coming out, it was the end. But, and this is actually a really good question to end on, because to me, finding out what the future of our, not only my own journey is, but all of our journeys is really valuable. And, you know, this is just my truth. When the book came out, I was extremely relieved. Because as you guys heard in the beginning of the speech, I thought this would be a 3-month project in the beginning. I thought I'd just call Bill Gates, interview him, and everything would be done. Never in my wildest dreams did I think I would have spent 7 years pouring my heart into a singular thing. Now, what ended up happening, though, is, you know, the book came out, and I started realizing that the book in some ways was sort of a means to an end. It wasn't the end in and of itself, but I never could have known that at the time. And I think all of us in our own careers sort of face a similar situation, where you think, the goal is to, operate this chain of hotels, or the goal is to, take over this market. We all have these goals in our head, which actually are really healthy. It's really good to have these goals sort of out in the distance that inspire us to become better versions of ourselves. The real value of a goal isn't the goal in and of itself, it's its ability to inspire us to grow into the person who can achieve that goal. So while I did think the book at the time was the end of the journey, only now in hindsight can I see the point of this book was, and the point of this journey was never simply to publish a book. And it's actually taken me many years to realize that the point of the book wasn't even what I thought. And I don't know if any of you can relate to this, but one of the unexpected things that happened to me the past 2 years, because what gives me joy is being in a room with all of you, but a lot of the past 2 years I had to do events like this virtually, and one of the things that happened unexpectedly when I spent 2 years in a lot of solitude was I was forced to reflect. When you're alone and when you're in silence, reflections sort of come naturally. And not only was I reflecting on the past and where I'd been, but I naturally began to reflect on the future moving forward. And that's when things started to change. And one of the big epiphanies I had was that when I had started this journey 12 years ago, my original idea was, let me just go interview all these people who I looked up to, get all their advice, stuff it into a book, and make it a very practical career book for people. And while that happened in some ways, only now in hindsight can I see that was never the purpose of this journey. Only in hindsight can I see that the point of the third door, the soul of the third door, has always been about possibility. If I've learned one thing over the past 12 years, it's that you can give someone all the best tools and knowledge in the world, and their life can still feel stuck. But when you change what someone believes is possible, they'll never be the same. And I'll just end on this one final note because your question really inspired this, because it's something, frankly, I've been thinking about a lot. Because I think everyone in this room, whether we're aware of it or not, is sort of in a transition about thinking what the next chapter in our careers are going to be. Where else in the hospitality are you still dreaming of going? How else you're still dreaming of, moving to and growing and expanding and evolving into? And I know for me, while it's never a perfectly laid out plan, there is a singular intention. And I'll share this one anecdote that's just been in my mind that to me sort of symbolizes where I think the mission's going to continue moving to. And this story takes place in Baltimore, Maryland, and I read it during my research of the third door. And this story takes place in a school in a really rough part of town in Baltimore, in a really rough school, and I think it was a teacher teaching for Teach for America, and she was assigned to maybe 3rd or 4th grade. So one day she realizes these kids need some inspiration. So she tells the kids, all right, today, instead of our math lesson, we're all going to draw pictures of our biggest dream in life. What we want to be when we grow up. So the teacher passes out the papers and the crayons, and all the kids start coloring, except for this one boy sitting in the back of the class. And about 5 minutes later, his eyes light up and he starts coloring. And the teacher, at the end of the day, collects all the papers and goes through them and sees that the young boy drew a picture of a pizza delivery man. And the teacher was very concerned. So the teacher called the mother that night and explained the situation, and the mother said that she wasn't surprised. The mother explained that the only male figure in this boy's life who wasn't in jail or on drugs was his uncle who delivered pizza. And what I learned from that story is that young people will always reach for the highest branch they believe is possible. People will always reach for the highest branch they believe is possible. So it's our jobs, whether it's family, schools, or the business community at large, to illuminate more branches. And that's the mission moving forward. So I want to thank you all again. I hope you have an amazing rest of your day. And I'll invite Sebastian back up. Thank you very much, everyone. I appreciate it.